Let's get joined up. Today's show is brought to you by Audible, and right now you can get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/joinedup. There's over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle or MP3 player. So thanks for tuning in to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, a regular show about all things writing, including interviews with authors, screenwriters and key figures from the publishing industry. Plus loads of hints, tips and inspiration for all creatives. You can follow us on Twitter at JU Podcast, leave a quick iTunes review or just tell a friend.
Joined Up Writing.
Hello and welcome to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, where a little procrastination can go a long way. Happy New Year to you all. I'm Wayne Kelly and it's episode 144 with Canadian novelist Sarah Leipciger talking about her latest book coming up for air. Now living in London, Sarah's got so much to say about the therapeutic power of writing, her process, what she learned from her short story success and why, like so many of us writers, she's obsessed with stationery. Before we dive into that, how are you all and how was your festive break? I'm guessing strange and quiet would sum it up for most of us in this weirdest of times. Hopefully you and yours are safe and well and, well, let's just hope things will continue to improve over the coming weeks and months. For me, I'm finding writing any kind of fiction to be really difficult. I've done some editing, but the only consistent writing I've been able to do over the past year has been songwriting. I know it's something I've spoken about before. Maybe it's just the ideal format for me in tough times. Songs are short, they're often cathartic, and they encourage collaboration. As to get them to even sound half decent, I have to work with my oldest friend George Odom, who just also happens to be an incredibly talented musician. I can get stuff off my chest, I can solve musical and writing related problems and sing my heart out whilst committing it to record. And taking the decision to release all of it online, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon and everywhere else, has given me the impetus to actually finish stuff and get it out there, which is not something I can always say about my writing. So we've got an album of 12 songs out there, but we're already working on the follow-up and a new single that'll be out in a couple of weeks. And I think digital distribution for music has got a lot of parallels with self-publishing books. You're taking control of the whole process from writing to editing to distribution, and you're having to try your hand at lots of different skills. And as with self-publishing, and come to think of it, podcasting as well, the trickiest part is always trying to get people to check out your stuff, and even if they do like it, getting them to share it with others. But as I've said many times on here in the past, the size of your audience shouldn't dictate how you feel about the work that you're producing. First and foremost, do it because you enjoy it or because it fulfills some other creative desire you might have. Do it because it makes you feel good. It's something that comes up in my conversation with Sarah in today's interview. Writing and creativity is good for the soul, and right now, music just happens to be the medium that's working for me. For you, it might be poetry, short stories, or even just a personal journal. It doesn't matter. Express yourself, get it out of your head, and I guarantee you will feel better. If you're still interested, I'll put another one of my tracks at the end of the podcast, but either way, I really want to hear about your creative projects, whether they're writing related or not, so don't forget to get in touch. You can do that by tweeting me at JUPodcast, emailing wayne@waynekellywrites.com, or dropping me a line on the Facebook page. Also, don't forget to join the email mailing list at joinedupwriting.co.uk. It's totally free, and you get a couple of downloadable goodies when you sign up. And you'll be the first to find out about upcoming shows and events. Right, let's finally cut to the chase and hear today's interview with Sarah Leipciger. So born and raised in Canada, Sarah lives in London with her 3 children and teaches creative writing to prisoners, which is something that we chat about in the interview. Her short fiction has been shortlisted for the Asham Award, the Fish Prize and the Bridport Prize. Her first novel, the critically acclaimed The Mountain Can Wait, was published in 2015, and her latest book, Coming Up for Air, was released last year and has just come out in paperback, as well as being available everywhere you can get great books. So enjoy the chat, and I'll be back at the end to play you another bonus track from the new album as well.
Joined Up Writing.
Okay, Sarah, thanks a million for joining me on Joined Up Writing. Really appreciate it. So why don't you start off just by giving us a sense of where you're speaking from and how things are going at the moment, all things considered.
Yeah. Speaking from my living room in London, it's the one space in the house where I can close the door, because I'm sure, as everybody else who's got children would understand,
Yeah.
my kids are home. So, but we're just rolling with it. That's what I'm getting a lot of messages from concerned friends and family at home in Canada.
Of course, yeah.
Which, of course, and you know what it's like when you're not in the place and you're getting the news. The perception that they're getting in Canada is that we are just sinking.
Sure,
it doesn't feel like that here. Life goes on, and we just have to. It's not ideal, and I have moments where I don't think I can do this anymore. I don't think I can.
You wish you were back home, yeah.
Well, not even just. I wish we were back in time.
Yeah,
it's just.
Sure.
But it's got to a point where it's so crazy, I almost feel numb. I just can't take any more in. And my children, I'm trying really hard to, it sounds really hokey, but to just embrace the day. My kids are all right today. They're doing their work. They're making their jokes. They're having their fights.
Yeah.
And that'll be again tomorrow, and the sky's not falling down. So
kids tend to adapt much, much better than adults anyway.
Yeah.
To them, this is, I should imagine it's a lot of the time, it's just a bit of an adventure, and it's just different to, normal days. They adapt much quicker than us.
Yeah. And they will heal from this much more quickly than we will.
Yeah.
And just absorb it into their lives in a much more kind of natural and healthy way, I think.
Yeah, I agree. No, I totally agree. Well, so that aside, so why don't you let's focus on something positive. So why don't you start telling us about your new book coming up for air?
So this is a book that is based on a myth that I discovered about two stories coming together. One about a toy maker from Norway, and the other about a mysterious woman who drowned in the Seine at the turn of the century in Paris around 1898, 1899.
Mm-hmm.
Her face became the inspiration for something that 60 years later, this toy maker built, which I can't tell you because that gives away the plot. And so that part of the story is, some of it's true, some of it's untrue. A lot of it I fictionalized.
Mm-hmm.
And all I can really say is her face is one that anybody who's reading this book will actually know, but not even realize that they know. You've got to read it to find out. And then I added a third strand into this story, a Canadian character, somebody who is peripherally involved in all of this. And I mean, there's three main characters in this story, and they are all very closely linked to each other, but none of them ever really becomes aware at all of the other, which I quite like, the idea of these three people being the three main pieces in a puzzle, but they're not aware of each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds great. Well, it sounds really, really intriguing. So excuse the pun, but what was the initial jumping off point? The lady jumping into the Seine, or was that what kind of sparked the story for you initially?
Mm-hmm. Well, that bit I invented, and I really liked the idea of a story, and it's not giving it away to tell you that, and you know this right away, that her thread of the story is told from beyond the grave.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that I wanted to do that was because whoever this woman was, there was a woman who was pulled out of the Seine, possibly.
Yeah.
And a lot has actually been written about her and wondered about her. And she's often portrayed as being a victim, being silenced, being a muse for other men to write about. So I thought, hey, I'm gonna kind of reawaken her from the dead give her a voice and let her tell the story and let her kind of set the record straight and tell us what really happened, which of course is all fiction. So I'm just doing the same thing as everybody else. I'm putting words into her mouth. But that was, I suppose, the jumping off point. And when I heard about, again, so sorry, can't tell you what it was, but when I heard about what the connection was between this toy maker and this woman, I was so intrigued by that. I had to kind of steal that and turn it into a story because it is so interesting.
Well, it sounds fantastic, but so essentially you've got 3 lives, 3 stories, 3 locations and timelines. So that sounds like a really exciting stroke daunting writing challenge. So how did you go about pulling all those strands together? Did you just write the novel in sort of chronological order and then reassemble it, or did you work on individual strands? How did that go?
I think now it's been years
sure, yeah.
since I started, but I think, it was in terms of the different voices and the way that they play out. That was mainly chronological in the way that I wrote it. But when it came to editing, I really had to think about in what order is this going to be the best way? How can I order this in the best way so that, the tension is always rising and the momentum is always moving forward, and you are, as a reader, slowly discovering how these 3 strands are connected. So when I was editing, I really took it apart and did that thing, where you see in films where writers have got like stacks of paper all over the floor.
Yeah.
I actually did that, which, I haven't done before or since, but I had to, because with a book like that, I guess when you're assembling it, you really have to get very physical with it and take it apart and lay it out and look at all the parts and see how they fit. And I had to draw a big diagram on brown paper and roll that out so that I could stand and have a bird's eye view and look at the whole, because with something, this isn't a super complex structure at all, but for me it was. And to just stare at a computer screen and try and figure it out, there's no way that was going to work. It had to be physical and take up space in the room in order to get it right.
And so as you say, there's so many moving pieces with something like that, and you're trying to sort it out in your mind. So did you enjoy the process, would you say, or is that too strong a word for it?
Sometimes, but I'm sure you've heard from a lot of writers that you've spoken to. It's sometimes it's just work, or a lot of the time it's just work. And there was bits that I definitely avoided because they were more difficult. And I kept thinking, I'll get to that later. I'll get to that later. I'll get to that later. And eventually the later arrives and you have to get to it. And it's tasks that you just don't want to have to face because they're so tricky and you don't have the answer necessarily. But magically the answer always comes.
That's the best thing to focus on, I guess, when you're stuck in the woods like that.
It's and I guess it's just trusting that the answer will come, and then if it doesn't, I suppose it's having the courage to realize that you've made a mistake or that something needs to go, and then that can be very liberating when you chuck out that character or you chuck out that chapter, that the reason the answer isn't coming is because there isn't one. It's not going to work.
So did you find, was there almost like a Eureka moment with this when you finally thought, yes, everything fits together and I've kind of got it, or was it just kind of, it crept up on you and before you knew it, you were there sort of thing?
I don't remember a Eureka moment. I think one of the hardest things to figure out was the way that Anouk, she's the Canadian character, the way that she fit into this. And I think my Eureka moment was when I discovered that all 3 of these characters are storytellers. Anouk, she's a writer. The Norwegian character, Peter, he's telling the story to his son. And Lon Canoe is kind of setting her, like I said before, she's setting the record straight. She's telling all of us her story from beyond the grave. And when I had that thread that was like, okay, this is how these people fit together. They're telling their own stories, but also without even realizing it, they're telling each other's stories.
Well, it sounds fascinating, as I say. So let's put the book aside for a second. So let's go back in time a little bit.
Sure.
So tell us a bit about your background, where you grew up. You've kind of hinted at it in the introduction as well, but where you grew up and your earliest memories of writing.
So I grew up in Ontario in Canada. I was born in Peterborough, which I know you've got a Peterborough here as well. Mm-hmm. And then I think when I was about 9, I moved to Toronto and so had my teenage years there. And then I moved to the west coast of Canada and spent my last years, about 6 or 7 years there before I left the country. But my earliest memories of writing, I'm so glad that you asked that, because that's really fond memory for me. I still used to and still do and always will have a huge love affair with stationery and notebooks and pens and things like that.
Yeah, I can't fault you there.
Oh my God, yeah. and my mom had a drawer which had all kinds of notebooks and pencils in it. And I remember some really great, like leather one that smelled really beautiful. One of the, the big yellow legal pads. And I was young and ignorant and never asked her why we had this, but there was nothing kind of more amazing to me than to dig into that drawer and pilfer something out of it and then sit on the couch. I can even see the couch that I was sitting on mm-hmm. and write stories in these little notebooks. So they were probably terrible stories and I didn't save them, sadly, but I have been writing stories for as long as I can remember. But I think in those days it was more because I just wanted to touch the notebook and smell the notebook. And
it's the physical act of writing. Yeah. I can relate to that. I know what you mean, because I can remember, because it's not something I do really anymore, handwriting.
Yeah.
It's not very often. If I'm somewhere and I've got a notebook or something maybe, but even then it's not usually reams and reams of stuff. And the thing that I remember being about sort of, I don't know, 9, 10, 11 or whatever was, write. I'd have an assignment or something for school and I'd be writing a story, but I'd be writing it in the half light at night time when I was supposed to be in bed. I can remember writing by like the landing light and stuff like that and just scribbling it down and actually loving that sense of it, and then looking back and seeing all the pages that you kind of accumulated and stuff. I loved that side of it.
Yeah. And even just like turning over a page that's been written on and how crinkly it is and lovely it is. And I've spoken about this with lots of different writers actually, and there is that whole different experience of writing by hand or writing on the computer. And sadly, I am a computer writer now. I couldn't imagine.
It's necessity, isn't it, really?
Yeah. But there are people out there. I've got a good friend who did most of her first draft by hand. And I think she will always write like that. And then, of course, that for the first time you put it onto the computer, that's one of your first edits. So it adds another whole layer.
Yeah. I've spoken to people that have done that before, and I can, in a way, I can sort of see the benefit of doing it, because as you say, it's got an immediate edit sort of built into it. So I can sort of see that. But I also know that, I might restart a sentence 8 times, and that's not always great when you're writing by hand and you're scribbling things out and writing over. Whereas you can just press the delete key on the computer.
Yeah.
So I can see both things with it. So at what point did that kind of that childhood passion, and you say the physical nature of the writing, all that kind of stuff, when did that change into something else, or you thought maybe that this was something that you'd like to do when you were older?
I think when I was even when I was in high school, because I can remember I had this idea of traveling and writing and, writing fiction. So, I mean, even when I was applying for university, I was applying for writing courses. I think I always knew. And I remember I went to the University of Victoria in Canada, and I first applied into the fine arts, into the creative writing. And then somebody who was in my life, kind of a mentor of mine, said, "Oh, you can't do that. That's ridiculous. That's not a career. You have to at least do journalism." So, and I was 18. So I was like,
story,
okay, I guess I'll do journalism, and, ticked that box instead. And within the first couple of weeks at university, I knew I'd made a huge mistake. That wasn't what I wanted to do. So I had to kind of fight my way back into the writing program. And I think that took a term or something, and scraped my way back into there. But even then, doing the course, and I didn't feel satisfied. I wasn't doing the writing every day, feeling like it was actually a part of my life. And I felt like a fraud, and I still feel like a fraud. I mean, that I'm sure you understand too. That doesn't really go away.
Imposter syndrome, yeah.
Yeah. But I think, in my early 20s, there were I didn't feel committed at all. I didn't feel like I was in it. And I think it wasn't until after university, I went and did the traveling, tried to do some writing, met someone, moved here to England, and then indeed did take some editorial job at a horrible trade magazine publisher. Mm-hmm. But then I started getting up in the mornings to write, and I started doing that every day. And before I knew it, I was in it. I finally felt like, oh, I'm actually doing this. I'm actually taking this seriously. But then, of course, it still takes years to get anything published or to get anybody to pay attention to you. Yeah. It's been a long, long journey.
So you were born and raised in Canada, but obviously, as you mentioned, you now live in the UK. So how do you think that's influenced your outlook and your work, if at all?
Oh, that's a great question, because it's hugely influenced my work. When I was in Canada, when I was younger, I couldn't wait to leave and get out and see things and have experiences and all that stuff. And now that I've been gone for so long, I just want to go back. Mm-hmm. But my children are here. My life is here. I can't uproot them. So for the meantime, I'm here. So I think that writing for me is a way to stay connected to home and connected to Canada. And, my first book took place in Canada. Mm-hmm. Coming Up for Air has a strand that takes place in Canada. The book that I'm writing now is all in Canada. Mm-hmm. And I just wonder, if I had stayed in Canada, would I be more likely to be writing about other places? Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know. It's so curious. And I've actually embarked on a PhD asking this very question. Right. Looking at the uprooted writer and how that changes possibly your process or your relationship to home. And I was speaking to a Canadian writer, Kate Pullinger, just a couple of weeks ago. And she is a very good Canadian writer. And she's been living in England for the same amount of time as me, probably longer than me. I think she's been here for almost a decade longer than I have. And I kind of said to her in an offhand way, I was like, oh gosh, I'm doomed to be writing about Canada. And she said, yeah, you absolutely are. So I think she's had the same experience.
She can relate to it. And do you think maybe because you're not there, do you think maybe the way that you think about Canada and the way that you write about it is to a certain extent romanticized? Do you think because you're not there, do you think maybe, because all of us, when you live somewhere and you're there for a long period of time, the romance and everything else kind of dies away with it, and it's just reality, isn't it? But do you think there's an element of that you've kind of romanticized that idea of home and what that means?
Yeah. 100%.
Well, you don't need a PhD. There you go. That's the answer, and that's
done. Definitely, and for me, and it's a lot of it is about the landscape. And when my first book came out, not everybody, but people who were talking about it were calling me a landscape writer, which I thought, hey, that's really cool. I never set out as that, but it's a lot of it is landscape, but that is evolving. The book that I'm writing now isn't so much about landscape. And I don't want to talk about it too much, but no, sure. There's a much more an aspect of Canada's history and Canada's cultural history. And the book that I'm thinking about next, one of the ideas I have for my next book would be looking at Toronto from a much more historical point of view. Mm-hmm. So I think, like you say, it started with landscape, literally missing trees, water, fresh air, needing to plunge into that and, hey, I'll just write about it because then I feel like I'm there. But now it's evolving into more of an interest of my country's history.
Yeah.
Which when I was younger and living there, of course, had zero interest at all.
The other thing is to try some other places outside of London, because obviously London is almost like a country in itself, really. Within the UK, it's so different to most other places in the UK. It's strange, really. Obviously, there's so many more people there, and I know it's a huge place, and it depends which bit of London and everything else that you live in, but it is kind of a different experience. I suppose the same could be said of Canada, depending on which coast you live on and which bit of it you're in. So
but you can guarantee that when I leave England, and I say when because I do hope to grow old in Canada, but if I leave, I'll be writing about London all the time.
Well, sometimes I think it's about getting that. Maybe the perspective of it. Sometimes you have to be. It's like standing back from a painting to a certain extent to be able to see it properly.
Absolutely. I mean, people ask me, because I've been working in prisons for almost 20 years now, and so an expected question is, "Have you written about prison? When are you going to write about prison?" And I still feel like I'm too close to it. And it'll be something that I'm not interested in or really capable to write about until I've left. And I've been gone for several years.
Well, as you mentioned that, because I wasn't going to specifically ask if you'd planned to write about prison, but just mention the fact that you do teach creative writing to prisoners. So tell us a little bit about that and what you think it has brought to your writing so far. I'm not saying that you're not writing about prisons, but what do you think you've kind of learned from the experience?
I suppose what it's brought to me, just appreciating what writing can do for people that are never going to be professional writers, and that's not their goal anyway. And seeing writing as a way as a therapeutic thing for people, but also as a way for people to feel empowered, to feel some self-worth, to see that their stories are important and that their ideas are important. And that's a really beautiful and honorable thing to be a part of. And I will never, ever grow tired of that. I've been doing that almost 2 decades, but just to see the peace that it can bring to people. I've worked with mainly men who have committed crimes that you don't even want to say out loud. And I've worked with people who have maybe cheated the tax man. I've done the whole spectrum. But for everybody, one and the same, being able to sit with a group of, when you're living in that place and everything's pretty crap and you're being treated less than human, you're being treated as a number, you might be scared, you might be depressed. But to be able to sit down in a room with other men who have chosen to sit down in this room and spend 3 hours, the lessons are quite long, it's 3 hours, but to spend 3 hours together and be vulnerable together and share tea and biscuits and talk and share your work, that side of it is just amazing. And I guess, like I said before, has just brought to me a real appreciation for the fact that you don't have to be an amazing writer to be a writer, I guess.
Yeah, and the therapeutic side of it, I can definitely relate to that. As you say, I think sometimes just writing and just the cathartic nature of it, just getting something out on paper sometimes is really, really helpful. It's something I talk to other people about all the time, non-writers, family members and things sometimes, and they kind of roll their eyes. But it's true. It's the same. Even if it's a diary or whatever it is, it's not for anybody else. I think if you're struggling or you're a bit down or whatever, I think it can be really, really, really helpful.
Oh, I think I've written my way out of every problem I've ever had, because once you get it out of your head, you can untangle it.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. And I think you can be honest and articulate in a way that your brain just won't allow, because I suppose that voice in your head is echoing off your skull, bouncing into itself. When you get it out there, you can really see it, and it feels like you've told somebody, I suppose.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. So you mentioned a minute ago. You mentioned about your first novel, which was The Mountain Can Wait, I think. And
Yes.
So tell me about your path to publication with that book. Was that was your first published novel? Was it?
Mm-hmm. I was very, very lucky. I have a mentor, someone who's taught me in the past, and when I finished that book, she gave a little nudge to her agent, and who is now my agent, Claire Alexander. And so I was very lucky in that sense to have somebody say, "Hey, you should have a look at Sarah." I think another agent had contacted me online because of a short story that I had written that was online. So I think because of that, there was a tiny little buzz. There was a tiny little, "Hey, we could pay attention to this person." Uh-huh. So I met Claire and we hit it off really, really well. I think my book at that point, it was only really, I was still in the draft period, which I know you shouldn't, the wisdom would say, don't approach an agent until you've got a nice, shiny, finished product. But I wasn't quite there. But I think it was more of a personality thing. Mm-hmm. Claire and I hit it off. She liked the first few chapters, so she was willing to take a chance with me. And it was a few more months before we were able to send it out to editors. And then that was really exciting. I think she sent it off on a Monday. I don't know why I'm saying that. It just makes the story sound nice and tidy. And she said, she said, forget about it. Don't even think about it for a week or 2 weeks. Just forget that it's out there. Just chill. It's out there now. Let's see what happens. And I'll never forget this. I think it might have been the next day, she started sending me these phone messages, giving me little quotes of things that editors were already writing back to her.
Brilliant.
It was less than 48 hours, and there was interest already. It was very exciting. And the editor that we ended up going with at Tinder Press, she had just come off maternity leave, and my manuscript was sitting on her desk. And I always say it was like the planets aligning. She had just come back, I think that day or the day before. This was sitting on her desk. She picked it up. She loved it. We met her a couple of days after that, and we were off. So away. It was not what I was expecting. It was all just, sometimes I think the universe just kind of says, here you go. I'm giving you this.
You've got to be there to meet it, though. It's like if your ship comes in, you've got to be able to row out to meet it. And obviously you were ready to do it, and you had the skills.
Yeah.
So yeah. Was that, I know it was your first published novel, but was that the first novel that you'd finished?
It was the first novel that I'd finished, but it was probably the fourth novel that I had started.
I see. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I totally understand.
Yeah.
And you kind of mentioned because before that you were kind of focusing more, well, not necessarily focusing more, but you were doing, you were having some success writing short stories and being shortlisted for some prestigious competitions like Bridport and things like that. Mm-hmm. So what do you think you learned from writing short fiction?
I suppose that's a way that, I guess two things. I guess you really hone your skills, don't you, doing short fiction, because it has to be so precise and surgical, and there's no room for, there's no wiggle room, I guess. There's no forgiveness in short fiction. So in terms of like writing and craft, I guess that's where you sharpen your claws. And then in terms of being a writer, I would say those years of submitting short stories, that's where you grow your skin, your thick skin, because of all the rejection. And, it's like you write this story, you're proud of it. It's the best work that you can do. This is what you've got. You send it out to competitions or whatever, or 10 different magazines, and they all say no.
Yeah. And
it comes back. It's just, no, this isn't for us. And you feel like you've been punched in the stomach because that was your best. Mm-hmm. That was your best shot. Yeah. Nobody wants it. And I think that's really important to go through that for years and years. And that's still going to happen.
Yeah.
I've sent out, since I've started writing novels, I don't write a lot of short stories. I've written a few. I think I may have submitted one to a competition, and no, don't want it. Yeah, I think just learning that 90% of this game is rejection and people telling you no. And it doesn't mean, it shouldn't stop you. It doesn't mean that you're bad or that you're never going to get published. It just means that the formula wasn't there for that story and that person.
And is that kind of how you think about it now with when you get a little bit of rejection like that? Do you think, well, it's just not the right story for the right person?
Yeah. And I'm quite interested in writing some nonfiction and trying to get nonfiction pieces out there just into newspapers and magazines. And with publishing books, you try to do that as part of a promotional thing. And so some of the pitches that we've put out now have been rejected as well. And I think partly that's because of the virus that shall not be named.
Sure, yeah. You're
competing with that. So there's just not the space for writerly features at the moment. But I think it's also, it's just ideas that people aren't necessarily interested in. And that's it's not because I don't have good ideas. It's just, there's not the space for it at the moment.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So when you sit down to write, you mentioned at the beginning, obviously, I know that especially now this is probably more important than ever, but how do you sort of get into the zone, if you like, when you're sitting down to write? Obviously, you've got family and everything else, and part of that's about closing the door, but how do you get into the right mental headspace to be able to do that?
So I've got two places, and this is, let's just forget about kids being around and let's just pretend that, but when things are, when conditions are right, I have two places in my house that I write. One of them is the kitchen table, and the other one is I've got a standing up desk sort of in another room of the house that faces out onto the street. Mm-hmm. And it sounds really hokey, but there's just kind of a feeling of what space I want to be in, and I can't explain why. Mm-hmm. And usually that space is the kitchen table. I like to be near the kettle. I like to see the back garden. And I often light a candle. I want to make it a comfortable space, and I like to put whatever resources that I need for the chapter or the section that I'm working on. I like to have those close by, whether I'm going to look at them or not. I like to have them. I like to have kind of a pile on my left and a pile on my right, just so I feel like I'm in an enclosed space and the information is close to me.
Yeah.
This is just a matter of chucking things on the table and there you go. I'm certainly not precious about it, but it would feel very weird to me to be sitting at a naked table with just a computer on it and not my resources around me, even if I'm not going to be looking at them. And that's about it. And then it's just work, isn't it? You open the file and off you go. I usually read whatever I wrote the day before. I might tweak a word or two, but really nothing more than that. And off to the races.
And then away
and
you go.
That could mean that might be just staring at the screen for 10 minutes or looking out the window.
Sure. When you're okay with that. So if you were sitting down to write a new novel, or you're starting a new project tomorrow, have you kind of developed a set approach now? Do you sit down and do you open one document and you just start outlining, or do you just go chapter 1 and off you go? How do you approach that?
So there will be, I'm just thinking about the book I'm writing at the moment. I think it's going to be different with every novel, because so far it has been different. This one that I'm writing right now, it was opening up a file and starting chapter 1. And that worked because the voice of the character, I can hear, there's two main characters, both telling the story. They are a man and a woman, and I can hear their voices very clearly in my head. So I was able to just, like you say, chapter 1, go.
Yeah.
Coming up for air, I spent almost a year reading first before I started writing it, maybe 8 months doing reading first. So I'd done a lot of research before I was able to open up the computer and start writing. Because with that book, I didn't know who was going to speak first. I didn't know where it was going to start until I spent all that time kind of figuring out all the background of it.
And when you were doing that, were you working on other things at the time? Were you writing other things? Because I find whenever I've had little periods that I might do that, if I'm looking into something or whatever, or building up, the energy or whatever it happens to be for a specific project, I'm I get a little bit anxious that I'm not writing it. I'm not, physically writing. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, well, with Coming Up for Air, I did get quite anxious that I wasn't writing, and I think that my intention was probably to spend more time on the research side of things, but I was getting really itchy, so I had to just start writing and then carry on doing the research as I was writing, and that was a lesson for me because it was the first book that I had to do so much research.
Yeah.
And so my plan was, do all the research and then write the book. But I've realized that for me, that's not how it works. It's got to be these two things happening together because they inform each other, don't they? The research suddenly changes the book, and then the book changes where you need to research.
Gives you a better idea of where you need to be looking, yeah.
Yeah. And also, I think with Coming Up for Air and for the book that I'm writing at the moment, there's been some overlap between books. You've got the things that you need to be doing for your editor, the things that you need to be doing for your publicist, if you're lucky and you've got a good publicist who's got you doing lots of things. Sure. That all kind of cuts into it as well. I think I started writing my current book before I sold. Yes, I did. I started writing my current book before we sold Coming Up for Air.
Right.
It took us a while to sell it. I'm with a different editor. And so I then had to put it aside and start working with Alice, my editor, with Coming Up for Air. So the book I'm writing at the moment had this big hiatus where I had to go back to Coming Up for Air to do the editing and all of that stuff. So I'm sure that in the end, it will be a different book than it would have been if I had just been doing that on its own, just write one book without being interrupted. But it was interrupted for several months, almost a year probably. So I had to acquaint myself with it.
Yeah, that must have been tricky going back to it.
Really, really was, and had to fall in love with it again and see why it was important again. But now I'm fully in love with it, and it's the two of us early in the morning at the kitchen table.
Yeah, the romance is back on. So
the romance is back on.
Did you, when you sort of had to reacquaint yourself, did you read the whole thing again? How did you go about that?
I didn't read the whole thing again. I dipped in and out. And because it's part of my study for my PhD, I was meeting with my PhD advisor at the time. I'm to be honest, I'm losing track of chronology of events and how the timing.
I totally understand if you've got multiple things on at the same time. Yeah.
But I think going back through some of it with him helped me. But I'm just, the way that I've written the books that I've written, I don't go back a lot. And I don't know if that's shooting myself in the foot, but that's just the way that I do it. When I get to the end of the first draft, I then have a huge mess to work with, to go back to, and going back and looking at chapters and bits that I don't even remember writing. And I'm sure that some writers listening to this would just be appalled to hear that that's how I do it. It feels very messy.
I think lots of people have got similar, approach. I think I don't think there is a right or wrong way anyway. But do you, when you go back to it, do you go back to page one and you read it from the beginning, or do you you do? Yeah.
Yeah. Print it out. Definitely. And I think I would be surprised, if most people don't do that, because you've got to have that different format, don't you? You can't, reading on the screen and reading on a piece of paper are two different things. And again, I think it's that physical side of it that we grew up with. I like to have the stack of paper. I love to see the development of a paper manuscript as it gets bent and folded and things spilled on it and stickers stuck to it and different colors. And I love it. It kind of
brings it
satisfies.
To life.
Yeah. That, like we were talking about at the beginning, the physical love the paper and the crinkly paper and like getting to use highlighters and stickers and stuff. I love it.
It's just stationery again, the whole thing. I mean, let's be honest, that's the whole reason that you're a writer, really. It's got nothing to do with anything else. I mean, again, I should imagine this should play a big part of the PhD.
Yeah. Use of highlighters.
It's basically a combination of homesickness and stationery. Okay, well, as we kind of move towards wrapping things up, what would you say has been the most helpful piece of creative or inspirational advice that you've been given along the way? What's kind of stuck out for you? It might be one, it might be more than that.
Do you know, that's such a good question. And if I had hours to think about it, I could probably come up with something more profound. But I knew this woman that I met in a creative writing class at university, and we hooked up again in Cambodia probably 5 or 6 years after we had met at university. And this was the time where I was really stressing. I went, I'm not a writer. I'm not writing. I don't feel like it's in me. And I was we were actually sitting with our backs against like a massive Buddha face at one of the temples near Siem Reap.
Yeah.
This was back when you could just walk through the temples. I think it's all roped off now, but anyway, I'm digressing. We were leaning on this beautiful temple and we were playing some writing games together, and I was moaning how I wasn't a writer, and she just looked at me and she's like, just shut the F up. I won't swear. I'm sure you don't have to swear.
That's a good way of putting it.
You are right. What else are you doing? That's what you're doing. Stop complaining. Stop moaning and saying you're not doing it, and just do it. Start sending stuff out. And it was a real kick up the butt. And I think it still took me years after that, but I always went back to that, where she just kind of said, like, there's nothing stopping you except for yourself. And I know that's a bit of a cliche, and those weren't the words that she used, but that was what she was telling me.
Yeah, well, it's great advice, and obviously something clicked, and you're doing great now, and you've got multiple books out and everything else. So well done. So as we kind of move towards a close, I know you don't want to talk about what you're actually working on right now, and I totally understand that because you're still working on it, but can you give us a hint of what might be up next, and also tell us where people can find out more about you online?
The book I'm writing about at the moment focuses on two people who lost their daughter, whose daughter disappeared. And these two people haven't seen each other in 20 years. And something has evolved, like in the case, I suppose, that's brought them back together. So that's all I can say about that. And it takes place in Canada. And I'm on Twitter. Yeah. I don't have a website, but I am on Twitter, just at Sarah Leipciger, and that's where you can find out most of everything that's going on with my stuff.
Well, I'll make sure I put that in the show notes, along with links to Coming Up for Air, which is that out right now? Or is about to come out?
Coming Up for Air is out. Yes. Sadly, it came out in the throes of lockdown last year. Brilliant. And the paperback is coming out this month.
Brilliant. Well, people can make sure they go and check that out, because it sounds like a fascinating story. But for the time being, Sarah, it's been great to talk to you. Thanks for coming on Joined Up Writing.
Thanks so much, Wayne. Really enjoyed it.
Joined Up Writing.
There you go. Thanks again to Sarah Leipciger, whose book Coming Up for Air is available right now, and be sure to give her a follow on Twitter. I'll put all of those links in the show notes over at joinedupwriting.co.uk. That's pretty much it for this week. Other than me chucking in another one of my songs, I'll play that after I've done the sign off, but don't forget you can find the entire back catalogue of interviews on the website. Make sure you subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Overcast, YouTube, or wherever else you get your podcasts from, to have the podcast downloaded automatically every time. Also remember to leave us a nice rating and review on Apple Podcasts, because it does really help others to find the show, or recommend it to some of your friends. So this week's song is Needle on the Black, and it's basically a love letter to the power of music, and specifically vinyl records, or LPs as we used to call them kids. A reminder of the band name, which is the Rye Dogs, and the album is called Are You Even Listening? It's out right now on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, or you can buy the download on iTunes. So as always, I'd love to know what you think of it, and if you do like it, go check out the album, give it a like, follow the band, and please share it with others. So here is Needle on the Black.
Life is like a record, I believe. You can't leave it in its sleeve. Blow up the dust and you will see. Revolution set you free. Put the needle on the black. Let it take you back. I hear the voices of yesterday and the music that they play, touching me inside my heart, tearing memories apart. Put the needle on the black, let it take you back. Na 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 na. Put the needle on the black. Na 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 na. Put the needle on the black. Ray and Otis sing the blues. Aretha lets it loose. Marvin's moving me to tears. Sam strips away my fears. Put the needle on the black. Let it take you back. Na 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 na. Put the needle on the black. Na 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 na. Put the needle on the black. I sit and watch that vinyl spinning, and it stirs my soul. 'Cause I can see the faces of those legends, and they've not grown old, not grown old. Na 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 na. Put the needle on the black. Na 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 na. To find the things you lack. Put the needle on the black. Let it take you back. Na 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 na. Put the needle on the black. Na 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 na. To find the things you lack. Put the needle on the black. Let it take you back. Na 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 na. Put the needle on the black. Na 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 na. Put the needle on the black. Na 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 na.
So there you go. That was the Rye Dogs, and that was Needle on the Black, and you can find that online, Spotify, and everywhere else. So thanks for listening. I'm Wayne Kelly. Happy writing, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.